Glad to have you here again on Money Matters. I am Folashade Ogrinde. In what can be described as an unexpected turn of events, Nigeria's headline inflation for the first time in 20 months declined from 18.17% in March to 18.12% in April. According to the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics, in its Consumer Price Index report, this represents a 0.05% point decline. The latest data by the NBS beats the expectations of economists who had projected a continuous increase in inflation rate. I'm joined now by economic analyst Paul Alaje. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. Now, the NBS report of a drop in April inflation rate has raised eyebrows because many weren't expecting it. What was your personal opinion about the report?
Well, it came as a shock because when you look at the economic factors, economic indicators, nothing suggests that Nigeria had a reduced inflation rate. However, I also want us to look beyond what we think. I want us to look by how much has inflation reduced. It's only 5 basis points. That is 0.5%. So it is so marginal, from 18.17% to 18.12%. So it's almost static because we should be very careful with figures so that we don't start giving people false hope. When you go to the markets, you see prices are still going up, but inflation is beyond price of few commodities. It's talking about composite price index, that is a basket of commodity, and taking average increase of those over a period of month on month or compared to the previous year by the same month, which you call year on year. So that perhaps is what NBS have done. For now, we just have to trust NBS with the figure and believe that the figure that they have pushed, they are correct. So, but sometimes NBS goes back to re-verify what has been published to say there may be error in one area or the other and perhaps correct itself. But for now, I will want us to work with it. Inflation is still high. It's not just double digits. It is above 18%. That calls for a lot of worry. Food inflation is also high. Even though there is marginal difference, food inflation is high. Core inflation is also significantly high. All of these inflation are outside CBN expected mandate, talking about monetary authority, between 6 to 9% projection.
Now, speaking of food inflation, the report also stated that the closely watched food inflation index, which has always been the major catalyst for rising inflation rates, recorded a surprising decline of 22.72% in April from 22.95% recorded in March. However, the average Nigerian will tell you that the price of food is still on the rise. Can you help us make sense of this?
Okay, so to play the devil's advocate, I think I would want to believe that in April, even though there are no sufficient rainfalls, which is a big surprise, and I talked to you in May, rainfall in Nigeria is becoming a scarce commodity or scarce occurrence. So but we may want to say there are output of some farm produce or crops that might have left, which is some argument that what we have thought could be responsible for this. But when you look at the real price, commodity prices compared to what happened last year and compared to what happened last month, I can say to you that food inflation seems to be higher. But National Bureau of Statistics say yes, it's increasing, but increasing at a relatively slower rate than last month. So because the margin is not much, the margin is not high, that is why some of us have decided to keep quiet and watch what May will look like, comparing what we have on ground to what we have in numbers. If the number is not a divergence from the reality, and we hope that the number will truly not be a divergence from reality when National Bureau of Statistics release that of May. But from my understanding and from what I've seen, I would just want a lot of people to accept what we have now, because it's not reflecting reality. I must be very, very honest with you. It's very tough to swallow, but because the authority have said that is the figure, and there are times when they've released figures that are correct, that are good, that we all agree with. I think we should also all agree with this. But this is also giving feedback to the Bureau to perhaps reconfirm, for the sake of public confidence, what has been published.
Now, with this new development, that is a drop in inflation rates, some experts are optimistic that this trend might be maintained in subsequent months. Do you agree?
Well, when you look at other factors that are leading to inflation, whether it will fall, we have banditry, we have insecurity, and some persons will quickly say that, hey, in economics, inflation is solely a monetary function. But we tell them that before you have monetary function, there are other factors that might have happened. Number one, we talk about food inflation, as published by National Bureau of Statistics. When people find it very difficult to move their commodity from one place to another, that means the price of such food would increase. And you can see what is going on in Kaduna, one of the states that produce food is being grounded, no water, no lights, no means of transport. You cannot connect from Abuja via rail again because of activity of labor. So apart from that, Kaduna in recent time has been bewitched with insecurity, banditry, kidnapping in major schools. So all of these are giving worries. So when you look at what is going on with food inflation, that is the major driver, and logistics, why there is relative ease in logistics because government has not increased pump price, that has induced suspicion and caused abnormal demand at a time. That could also explain why we might have had inflation to relatively slow, because it's energy, and energy affects all our economic environment, talking about fuel in this regard. So, but to say we will have something significant in May inflation figures, I doubt. From what I've experienced, this is still May. We are yet to get to the end of May. But even if you are going to have reduction, it may be slight reduction, maybe another 3 to 5 or 6 or 10 basis points, like we have experienced in the month of April. That may happen. But other things being equal, with the experience we are seeing across the country, burning of police station, and when more police station is burned, you are leaving that environment open to insecurity. The more insecure environment you have, the more challenging you have for food supply. So, and when you see even INEC offices are getting burned, police stations are getting burned, what we don't understand, what we might not be linking is that all of these have economic implication. So in those regions, that economic activity that surround security, that require security, if you now say they are better off, we'll be too quick to tell you that that will not be correct. So am I seeing a reduction? Because what people are expecting is we might suddenly be returning like we had in 2017, 16-17, during the last recession. After a while, the inflation is. The factor then are completely different from the factor now. Yes, we are earning more in terms of crude oil prices now, but you know there are other factors like COVID. We may have another shutdown. Government have started announcing the fourth restriction. So it will be too early to predict whether it will go up or go down. But whichever, whether it's going up or down, I don't expect more than 10-15% difference in what the next figure, particularly for May, will be.
Now let's talk about President Buhari's request to the House of Assembly to confirm another external loan of $6.18 billion. Are you worried about Nigeria's rising debt profile and the impact it can have on Nigeria's fragile economy?
Well, I'm very worried. I am over-worried. I'm concerned. Even though the president has assured, or the executive has assured us that such money will be borrowed for infrastructure. So my concern is what have we done with the previous money borrowed? And the kind of money we want to borrow now, they are commercial loans. Unlike what we had pre-Obasanjo's administration, where we borrow money from bilateral organization, through bilateral relationship, talking about Paris Club and so on. You know, it was easy for Nigeria to ask for forgiveness. But when you go borrow fund via Eurobond, how many people do you want to beg for forgiveness? These are purely people who trade on debt. So forgiveness will be very difficult. Even though some countries got relative ease in payment, you know, that did not affect Nigeria as such, because most of our foreign loan and domestic loan to a large extent, they are purely bond, treasury bills, you know, Eurobond, federal government bond, you know, Sukuk bond. You just have to pay back. So if you continue to borrow with the rate at which you are borrowing, should we not be bothered? Well, economics have answer, and the answers economists have created are three. Number one, compare your debt to GDP. your debt to GDP ratio is less than 40%. So economics will say, yes, it's a good beginning. You may be considering it. But before you take decision, quickly look at the second one, debt service to revenue. Debt service to revenue in 2020 was more than 50%. And that should worry us. It means 50% of all revenue we collected from crude oil, all revenues we collected from custom, all revenues we collected from FRS were used not for development, not to pay salary, not for politicians to quote and unquote, as people have said, loot. That's not it. Not for even padding, is to service debt. So that should worry us. It should worry us so much. So that is not a good one for us. We should be looking at not more than 40%, so that we can have 60% particularly to deploy for capital expenditure. So, I mean, yes, but the last one, which is the most important one, is to consider what is happening to debt service, impact of debt on the economy. So when we collect this money, at what rate have we increased borrowing? And at what rate have we continued to grow in terms of GDP figures? For Nigeria, we have borrowed for not less than 15%. And you can do that math. I recall that an organization, African Facts, it's an organization that audits people's information. They've called to get source of this information, and I've explained that you can look at how Nigeria borrowed from 2015 to 2020, a 5 years period, and look at the growth rate of debt. All of this information are available on www.dmo.gov.ng. Compare that to our GDP growth rate, which is less than 2%. So when you borrow above, your growth rate of borrowing is above 15%, your GDP growth rate is 2%. Meanwhile, you should not have less than 6.5% GDP growth rate. You know, even worst case scenario.
Now, Mr. Alaje, with regards to the point you just made, if you ask this question, or if you ask an average politician or government official, that such a person would readily blame this on COVID-19. How do you respond to that?
Before COVID-19, so take 4-year period, we have above 12% borrowing rate. And as at that 2 years period, we only have 2.01% average growth rate. Where was COVID in 2019? Where was COVID? So we need to understand that we need to put our best. The way Nigerian government is trying to work on ease of doing business, you know, we have moved from over 140, 160 thereabouts now to about 130. Yes, we are not yet there, but I've seen significant improvement, you know, from where we were at about 160, 167 to around 130, 131. It's a lot improvement, and we should celebrate. We should be happy that we are moving in the right direction. But when it comes to the issue of borrowing and the economy, I'm afraid it is not in the right direction, because who we pay? It is you and I that will pay. Now, that is not even sufficient. How are we borrowing this money? We are borrowing this money. We are going to international community to borrow. In fact, government may even tell you that the interest rate is zero. But don't jump at it, because you have something more than interest. When it comes to foreign borrowing, it is called exchange rate risk. Let me ask, in 1975, what was naira to dollar? 1985, what was naira to dollar? 1995, what was naira to dollar? 2005, naira to dollar. 2015, naira to dollar. Today, naira to dollar. The question is, should we be worried that we are borrowing in naira, in dollar, in pounds, and in euro?
Now, Mr. Alaje, this is indeed a very interesting conversation, and you've raised a lot of questions that we hope the government would give answers to. But thank you very much, Mr. Paul Alaje, for your time on the program. We'll take a break here, and when we return, I'll be speaking with an economist from the NESG on why Nigeria's manufacturing sector isn't performing as expected. Stay with us. Welcome back. For a while now, Nigeria's manufacturing sector has been on the front burner of economic discourse due to its potential to not only provide jobs and improve human development, but also contribute to the growth of the nation's GDP. Sadly, the sector has not lived up to expectations. In a recent publication by the Nigeria Economic Summit Group, NESG, only 5.73 billion naira has been invested into the sector despite the numerous opportunities in the manufacturing sector. According to the report, the gap between announced investments and actual investments points to the low confidence level of investors in the real sector. I'm joined now by Wilson Erumebo, Senior Economist at the National Economic Summit Group. Thank you very much for joining us on Money Matters. Now, the NESG report stated that only 5.73 trillion naira has been invested into Nigeria's manufacturing sector despite its potentials. Please tell us more about this report.
Yes. So what we basically did, it was premised on the fact that Nigeria has a very high unemployment rate. We have 33% of people in the labor force who are unemployed. Poverty has also increased, especially because of COVID-19 and its impact it had on different segments of the household. And so what we are saying is we did a report, two reports actually, a couple of years ago that looked at this Nigeria's sectors and see which of them have stronger potential for addressing some of the unemployment and poverty concerns that we have. And we have highlighted 6 sectors, in those reports. And the manufacturing sector featured, as one of the crucial sectors that has numerous opportunities, numerous potential in terms of even addressing Nigeria's foreign exchange problem, particularly in the area of exporting manufactured goods to other nations. It's a sector that, you can talk about forward-backward linkages. It feeds heavily on agriculture, particularly the food processing aspect, and then it also links to trade. When you produce, you sell to the market. It's a sector that, has significant opportunity in terms of investments. But what we've seen over the years is the fact that we've not been able to attract as much significant investment into this sector, and not just into manufacturing, actually, into the real sector, especially due to some issues that we highlighted in the report. So in essence, what we are saying is the sector has a very strong potential to create jobs, strong potential to address our foreign exchange problems. But so we highlighted some of the things that needs to be done to be able to ensure that we achieve this potential as a nation.
Now, what are those things you feel needs to be done in order for the manufacturing sector to live up to its potentials?
First of all, one of the things we cited as one of the key problems, this is in addition to all the structural problems that affect business in Nigeria, whether you're talking about infrastructure, inadequate power supply, and the likes. And we noticed for manufacturing, policy inconsistency is big. It's one of the biggest factors you could highlight as one that has limited investments, particularly when you talk about policy reversals. You implement one policy and tomorrow it changes, and some of those changes are not communicated to investors before they are made. So a lot of those things, investors, see Nigeria as one of many countries in Africa. It's not just about the potential this time. It's about competition. Where can I put my money and get favorable returns, and ensure that there's stable investment. So when you have cases of policy reversals, inconsistency in the process of making those policies, it makes it a lot more risky to do business in Nigeria and to attract this type of investment we need. And one of the things we pointed out, as to the solution to some of this problem is, if you look at Nigeria's manufacturing space in the last couple of years, you would notice there are some sectors, just maybe not as many as we should expect, but there are a few sectors that have been able to attract investments in those subsectors of manufacturing. One of them, cement. And we are all in Nigeria, and we know Nigeria used to be a net importer of cement, and we, over time, in about 2 decades or so, reversed to become a net exporter of cement. One of the other sub-industries is the sugar industry. And in these industries, what we've seen so far is the fact that there was the government was able to set up a sectoral plan, whether you call it a national action plan for the sector, to be able to ensure that there's a direction for the sector, there's a vision, there's a goal to make Nigeria, to address some of the issues relating to self-sufficiency and high imports of some of these commodities. So there has to be something deliberate from the government side to say, look, this is our plan for the sector. This is how much we think the sector can contribute to, addressing some of the foreign exchange and importation problems we have. And we've seen that worked in the cement industry and in the sugar industry. A lot of that is coming on, and we're seeing, some amount of progress. So policy inconsistency, yes, is one big issue, and we are saying it's something that we cannot overlook if we're looking at investment into the sector.
Now, a lot of sectors, including manufacturing, were affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Would you say the poor performance of the sector is solely linked to the pandemic, or are there other issues that might have affected the sector?
Yes, so if you look at the pandemic and the manufacturing sector, you'd notice in 2020 we had a decline of about minus 2.7% or thereabouts in manufacturing output. We had cases where firms that were engaged in producing non-essential items, had to shut down operations, particularly in the month of April, also when we implemented the lockdown. And then we continued with several restrictions and social distancing rules, which affected some of the demand for some of these commodities that are being produced across several sectors in the manufacturing industry. So yes, COVID had a very big significant impact. If you look at also FX, I mean, COVID, with COVID, oil price declined significantly, and Nigeria could not source foreign exchange, as input to get input for those for the manufacturing sector. So yes, COVID had a big implication, but I think it's not just about COVID this time, particularly when you look at the manufacturing sector. There were some interventions that we had and policies that we had even before COVID that, affected the sector and the economy at large. So if you look at, for instance, in 2019, we implemented the closure of land borders. And, at the time, there were so many manufacturers in Nigeria that were servicing neighboring countries. I mean, I could remember engaging, several shoe producers in our bar, and they were narrating how they were, seriously affected, by the closure of land borders, across the country. So it's not just COVID, and of course, we've had perennial issues of inadequate infrastructure, logistics concern. It's not easy to get goods from one part to the other without paying some, unnecessary fees and dues to, several state actors and non-state actors. There's also the issue of power supply and co. So there's so many issues. Yes, COVID came and made and perhaps amplified some of these issues and, plunged the sector into a deep state, and the fact that we recorded a negative growth. But that's not the only issue that affected the sector.
Now, the sector's stakeholders have repeatedly appealed to government to resolve some long-standing issues, such as poor quality of infrastructure, bad road networks, and inadequate electricity supply, amongst others. Now, based on Nigeria's current economic situation, are you optimistic that these issues can be resolved in the nearest future?
Well, maybe not in the nearest future, because some of these issues are long-term in nature. I mean, you can't build all the roads in one year, and even if we want to, I mean, we don't have the budget is not strong enough to be able to do that. Especially when you look at the federal government budget and you look at how much we are spending on recurrent expenditure, and the fact that even though we are budgeting even much more for capital expenditure this year, there's still going to be a shortfall, especially from the revenue side. If you are not able to achieve your revenue, it means that some of those ambitious projects that we have planned may not come to light. So that said, it means that it's not something that can be done now, but I think we can, start to make the move to ensure that we start engaging stakeholders and we start delivering an implementation. I think that's one of the things we cited in the report, that look, we've had series of plans for several decades decades in Nigeria, whether it's national plan, whether it's plan for the manufacturing sector, industrial plan here and there. But I think one of the biggest issues is getting the government and the relevant actors to implement and act on some of these provisions. And so that's one of the things we highlighted, that, look, we need to start acting, and as government. So one of the things we said was our cost of not implementing are very clear in the economy, and that's part of why we are where we are today. The fact that we've not done what we are supposed to do in terms of implementing some of those business reforms is part of why we have very high unemployment rates and poverty is increasing. And we're saying, look, these are the cost of not implementing. And if we don't implement even what we have now, some of these concerns and costs are going to keep increasing. And at the end of the day, it will not be beneficial for everyone, even for the businesses that are currently operating in Nigeria. So we're saying this time is the time to act. We must put our acts on the table and ensure that we get to implement whatever provisions we've had. For the manufacturing sector in particular, right now as we speak, there's no manufacturing sector plan. Our industrial plan, the latest industrial plan, is the National Industrial Revolution Plan, which was enacted or developed in 2014. So right now we need a plan for specific priority areas in manufacturing. Are we talking about cassava processing, which has numerous opportunities, particularly when you look at processing cassava into industrial starch? Are we talking about rice production? We all know the issues we have with quality in terms of rice production, quality and volume. Are we talking about, so many other oil refining and so many other subsectors within manufacturing that we think that could be priority areas? So we need the government to pick these areas, develop sectoral plans for these areas, ensure that these plans are in line with whatever national plan we have currently running, and implement, get the stakeholders together and derive a plan of action and hold everyone accountable. I think that's one thing we need to do to get this sector to move forward.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Wilson Erumabo, the senior economist at the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, for sharing your thoughts on the matter.
Thank you for having me.
That's it on the program. Thanks for watching. I am Fola Shadi Ogrinde.